Hello, it's Dragon Tame 1400, and this is RWBY Volume 5, my top 10 and my bottom 10 things. So this is, of course, my list, so your list is going to be probably way different. There might be some my top 10 lists that you don't like, and some of my bottom 10 lists that you really like. Anyway, without further ado, let's get on with it. So I like to get started in positive, so let's get started with the top 10. My number 10 is Blake's character growth. Now, Blake is an interesting character for me because she hasn't made the top 10 in these previous lists or the bottom 10. She's kind of been in between. I like the stuff she does, but they're not enough to make the top 10, and there's nothing really I like kind of dislike about any things that she's done. So she's kind of like never really been on this list. However, she just squeezes in at number 10, and what I really like about it is that you take it, this is just really a culmination of like since volume 1 that you have this character who like really needs to learn forgiveness and really needs to like learn not to kind of run away from her problems. And in the courses of the volume, she kind of changes throughout until like volume 4 and 5, where she's in volume 5 she's learned forgiveness and she's learned finally not to run away from her problems. I thought they did a really good job with her character development throughout the volumes. However, that being said, there isn't really a ton of stuff left for Blake except for maybe facing Adam. However, it's just like at this point, like her character arc is pretty much done, at least for the time being. They might start up something new in the later volumes. But that being said, like she did have a lot of time to shine volume 1 through volume 5, especially dealing with the White Fang, and now that kind of her goal is done, and too that she kind of brought the White Fang back to this peaceful organization that wants equality, whereas Adam kind of wanted this the Faunus to rule over the humans, this a very aggressive and non-peaceful organization. So Blake's character growth is pretty much done, at least for the time being, and I really do kind of like how they established that she kind of faced Adam, but she knew she wasn't strong enough to fight him just yet. They did establish that. Anyway, so that's my number 10, Blake's character growth. My number 9 is Cinder versus Raven. Now, I generally just don't like these. I don't want to say don't like, but my favorite fights are generally like emotional fights, and we'll get that on further on in the list, or fights that really dig down deep to character development. And this one kind of does that. You kind of see Cinder and Raven, two characters who we learn have given up like a lot of things in order to gain power, really. Raven's a little more complicated than that. We don't know exactly about Cinder's backstory just yet. However, we've got two characters that have kind of overstepped the moral line, if you will, to gain power. And they're kind of fighting each other. And at one point, like in the fight, Raven says to Cinder, look what you did to yourself. She says something on these lines. Look what you did to yourself to gain power. And then Cinder replies, look who's talking, implying that like what we learn later is that Raven's actually killed the last spring maiden in order to gain her power. So it's a little more deeper than that about exactly why she did that. And it's spoken like indirectly when she's speaking to Yang later, and I'll get more into that later on in the list. However, I did like that fight for like that dynamic, and it was like just a really cool fight to look at as well, which is a plus for a fight. It's not like I don't like that kind of things, but if it just has that concept alone, it probably won't make my list unless it's like extremely cool looking. But even then, like, what's the point of the fight if it doesn't move along the plot, have character development, or like in some way like emotional to the characters? And I thought this one did have some character development for both Raven and Cinder, which is why I liked it, and it also looked cool, and it really displayed these top tier characters in the show and really kind of displayed their maximum power, if you will, which is always good to see. Anyway, so that's my number 9, Cinder versus Raven. My number 8 is just the detail in like the writings on the paper. I mean, when you get a close-up of Gira's speech in I can't remember what chapter it was, but in this volume, you actually see word for word what his speech is. And there's other spots in the volume that actually had this detail. One of them was Ilya's letter to Blake, and there's some other moments too when Crow's like looking for the huntsmen and huntresses to help them out. Yeah, you can clearly see what's like written there. But particularly Rhaegar's speech, I mean, word for word. I mean, it's kind of what he said too. Like, I think it was like word for word what he said too. So it was I thought that was really well done. Usually like animation just kind of scribbles some stuff and you can't see it or whatever, and it's just like, or even like live action, they don't show like the writings a lot of times. So it's really good that they put in that bit of detail, and I personally really appreciate it. So that's my number 8, like just the detail and like the writings on the paper. My number 7 is Jean's semblance. Now his semblance is kind of strange. It could be one of the more underpowered semblance in the RWBY verse, or it could be one of the most overpowered. It just depends on what direction they actually go with his semblance. And I'll probably have a video on that, like my speculations of where they could take it. Because basically what we understand his semblance to be is he can enhance auras with his aura. Now as he gains aura control and as he gains like more understanding of his semblance, there could be other aspects to this that we don't know about. For example, Weiss's semblance, she can summon, she can do these glyphs. There's a lot of like stuff Weiss can actually do with her semblance and stuff, and Jean's could be like similar. It all depends on like what the authors want to do. However, I like his semblance, because his aura is actually stronger than most people's. We don't know if it's stronger than everyone's, but it probably is, to be honest. But right now we know it's stronger than most people's. He has like a lot of aura, and that actually just, his ability to give aura to others to really strengthen theirs goes along with that kind of concept that he has a lot of aura. So I do like them putting those two things together. And Jean, of course, I'm biased because he's my favorite character in the show. So that's my number 7, Jean's semblance. My number 6 is the backgrounds. Particularly like the floating islands were really nice. I should say actually scenery as well. I thought it was really well animated for the most part. And I really like the look of Mistral, how Team Ranger and Crow entered Mistral as well. I actually had that on that list, but I'm gonna shoe it in here, if you will. And just like a lot of the backgrounds, Maldry, I'm not saying that right at all, but basically where Blake and Sun were for the majority of this volume, like most of the last volume as well. That was that was very well animated, and just the backgrounds itself, you can tell they put like a lot of detail in some of these shots. And like I said, Mistral, and even like the bandit camp to an extent as well had like a lot of detail as well. I mean, it gave that feeling of, oh, this is the bandit camp. So that's my number 6, backgrounds. Particularly, like I said, the floating islands looked amazing. My number 5 is Oscar and Osman. Now, I really like this dynamic because you got Oscar as an everyman character and Osman, who is a Paragon character. Now, if you don't know what an everyday and Paragon character is, I'll just give you a few examples. I'll probably talk about this later, but an everyman is like Harry Potter or like Luke Skywalker, whereas a Paragon character would be like Dumbledore or Obi-Wan Kenobi, or like Gandalf if you really like Lord of the Rings. That's kind of the examples. Now I won't really get into details about like each character, but Paragon characters are generally there to teach like kind of the main characters, and everyman characters that resemble the everyman, and like how they grow throughout the story, they get stronger and that kind of stuff. You can see that with like Luke Skywalker, how in episode 4 he's actually really weak. He doesn't really know how to do anything except for pilot, and he kind of learns how to use a lightsaber. He learns all this stuff as he goes on, and then episode 6 he's actually pretty powerful. Anyway, so that being said, I do like that concept that Osman, the Paragon character, is inside the body of Oscar, who's the everyman character, and they kind of switch controls, if you will. Osman is clearly weaker in Oscar's body, and he even admits that his strength is diminishing, which is another concept I want to talk about later. But this dynamic that in one character you have an everyman and a Paragon character, and they're two different souls but the same body, if you will, and they can switch control, and it's just a very interesting concept. I like where they went with it in Volume 5, and I hope to they continue that path, and really maybe there'll be like a conflict between Oscar and Osman going later on. They seem to be going that way. Anyway, so that's my number 5, Oscar and Osman. My number 4 is Weiss versus the Lancers, and the Queen Lancer as well, because this fight is just kind of flashy, and it's through the floating islands, which I really like the scenery. However, you do get to see like Weiss grow as a fighter in this scene. It's the first time she fully uses her summon in battle, and she uses it pretty well. Not perfectly, and it still takes her time to charge up, so she still's got growth to go. But when she's like all the way back in like Volume 3, was it, where we got introduced to like her summoning and how she couldn't even do it at first, but her sister has displayed it done like really easily. So we got this concept of growth with Weiss. As she struggles to use it, she uses it partially at the end of Volume 3, and in Volume 4 she actually learns to use it. In this volume she finally uses it in a fight, which is actually a really good concept as well. And then at the end of Volume 5, we get to see like a weakness in her using it, that it takes her a while to use it right now. When she fought Vanal, or whatever her name is. Anyway, but I really enjoy this fight as well, and she was able to add a Queen Lancer to her arsenal that she used in the final fight as well. So I just like that concept. I didn't really like how the fight ended. I just like how it showed her growth as a fighter in that particular fight. So that's my number 4, Weiss versus Lancers. My number 3 is really Hazel's character. I really like the concept that he doesn't necessarily like killing people, but like he will to like please his master, and he'll kind of justify it too. Like with Oscar, he didn't want to necessarily kill Oscar, but he's like, no, this boy's death is on Osman's hands, basically, because he really wants to kill Osman. I mean, that doesn't justify it, but he's kind of like a I don't know exactly where he would rank in the in like this D&D scale or whatever. I would actually have to think about it, but he's definitely not like pure evil, if you will. Like there's definitely good in him, but he's like has this sense of justice and like moral obligation, but at the same time he still does these bad things, and he tries to justify the bad things he wants to do. They don't make him any right, but he's an interesting character because of that, because he's not necessarily a bad character. Like Cinder, for instance, is a lot different. Like she doesn't like try to justify like what she does is good. She just wants power, and she just kind of like wants to see people in pain for whatever reason. I hope we get an explanation on that. But Hazel's like, okay, I'm gonna do these wrong things, but the reason I'm doing them, like the ends justify the means, according to him, but they really don't in reality. And I hope like over time we get to see that character growth, that he sees that he's done all these bad things and he needs to make up for it, like kind of a redemption, if you will, of his character down the line. That, and he's kind of a beast, to be honest. He's kind of like a monster when it comes to fighting. His semblance of not like feeling any pain, and him being able to inject himself with dust. I mean, he's just a beast, basically. That was cool to see. Anyway, so that's my number 3, just Hazel's character. My number 2 is Yang's character growth, and also Yang's interaction with Raven, which directly ties into this. So you have Yang, who really for the first 3 volumes she was really underdeveloped character. However, in Volume 4, like because we did get to see like how she like punches through her problems, like she faces everything head on, and that's more established in volume 4. And her dad kind of gives her this advice that you don't have to like just face your problems head on. There might be an easier way around the problem as well, which ends up being like what Yang does at the end of this volume. The first time she meets Raven, her mom, she kind of does try to face her problems head on without really trying to think about things through. They end up working out just because plot convenience, and just because Raven is Yang's mom, and Raven actually wants Yang on her side, so it ends up working out for Yang. However, like it almost didn't, and she kind of realized throughout the volume that she can't face all your problems head on, which comes to like the end when she's fighting like Mercury and Emerald. Mercury like grabs her arm, and she was about to like fight Mercury, but instead she just lets her it's her robot arm, lets her robot arm go, and she ends up facing Raven. She doesn't fight Raven. She knows she's like no match for her. She knows she's the Spring Maiden, and she ends up like convincing Raven to let her get the artifact, the relic of knowledge, because Raven is afraid of Salem, and Raven is actually going to allow her own daughter to take on the brunt of Salem's forces instead of herself. I mean, she doesn't want to. You can tell there's like conflict in her, but basically at this point, this was a good development for Raven too, is that she loves herself more than she loves anyone else, including her daughter. Though she does love her daughter, just not as much as herself. And it just comes down to like survival. She wants to survive. She's willing to sacrifice anything to survive, even her own daughter. She doesn't want to, but she will. And and I hope they like develop that further overall. But we get to see, instead of Yang trying to fight Raven, she figured out a way around the problem, and Raven allows her to gain the relic of knowledge. So I mean, that was really good character development for Yang, and it started off earlier. And just like with Blake, I don't expect to see Yang to get any more development for a while, though it's not complete. Unlike Blake, her character development's kind of complete. Yang still has this thing to deal, her trauma to deal with her mother, and it'll be more on Raven's development than Yang at this point. However, we still have some growth to go with Yang. Anyway, so that's my number 2, Yang's character development, and I also enjoyed like Yang's interactions with Raven as well. My number 1 moment things in Volume 5 is just Jean versus Cinder. This fight, it wasn't like the best like looking fight, and it wasn't like action packed like Raven versus Cinder, or like even some of the fights during like Volume 3 that didn't really mean anything during the Vital Festival. However, this fight had so much emotion impact to it, and it is probably one of my favorite fights of all fiction. Jean's like reaction to seeing Cinder, and his goal in the fight was just to buy time for his friends, and basically to protect his friends so they wouldn't die, because he knows how strong Cinder is. He knows he's no match for Cinder. He just wants to buy time, and he even says this. Cinder doesn't figure it out at first. Jean basically just tells Cinder. However, the fight was like so emotional because Jean didn't want to lose anyone else, and he was very angry with Cinder for killing Priya, and the interaction was just like really amazing. And you got Cinder, who's kind of like just toying with him and everything until kind of like the end there, and then she figures out, oh, the best way I can hurt this guy who almost hurt me is by killing one of his friends that he cares about. And she noticed early on that Weiss was struggling with Fanara, so that's who she attacks. And I'll get more into like this exact fight and Jean and Cinder's interaction later, but it appears, and I'll get into why this is the case later, but it definitely appears that Cinder has become the main antagonist of Jean, and they're moving RWBY over to Salem being RWBY's main antagonist. They're kind of switching this out. right now. This volume like felt like more of a transitional period in that terms. So in like you might be wondering, oh, like why would you say that Cinder wants RWBY dead? But the fact that Cinder wants RWBY dead actually more establishes that she is Jean's antagonist, because Jean's main goal is to protect his friends, and RWBY is his friend. So, and it makes more sense because RWBY can just completely overpower Cinder because of her silver eyes, and that doesn't make for an interesting fight. But it makes more of an interesting fight for Jean to fight Cinder, since he's like so much weaker than Cinder right now. Particularly if she, even without her maiden powers, but even with them, it's like no comparison. Whereas RWBY can just use her silver eyes to overpower her, so it doesn't really make any sense that Cinder would be hurt with RWBY's like main antagonist. But Jean, I definitely foresee them having battles in the future, and Jean progressing, getting stronger, and end up actually beating Cinder. I don't think he will kill her, because I think that I'll get more into that later. However, I do think that Jean and Cinder makes like the perfect antagonist for Jean, and we'll probably see down the line, but Selina will probably make the perfect antagonist for RWBY. Anyway, so that's my number 1, Jean versus Cinder. So that was the top 10 things of RWBY Volume 5. Now let's get to the bottom 10 things. My number 10 is, basically, I wanted more training scenes, and I think most people will agree with this. I mean, we kind of got a little bit with Oscar and RWBY, and a little bit with Ren meditating. Well, whatever. And them kind of explaining what semblance it is and that kind of stuff, which I do appreciate. It was a little more exposition than I wanted to, and I almost like kind of put that on the list, if you will. However, like the whole thing with, I wanted to see kind of more training. Like Osman was like, oh, I'm going to train you and I'm going to work you hard, but we didn't really get to see that. We got to see like Oscar working hard, and that was it. I would have liked to see more of his training. So that's my number 10, more training scenes. My number 9 is a combination of like Adam's character and more White Fang. And during the final battle, there was only like a few White Fang out there, and I was like, doesn't Adam like rule this organization? And if I remember right from volume 2 and 3, there was a lot more White Fang. So it didn't make any sense why there would only be a few. And Adam's character, it kind of destroyed his character, if you will. And what I mean by that is like they took this guy who could have been like, his character had a really good cause, but he was doing everything the wrong way, sort of like Hazel to a degree. However, they made him like, oh, I think faunists are the superior race and humans should serve us. And then he was like saying things like, you know, they should fear us and everything. And like, and he killed like Selina Khan, the leader, who he actually looked up to just so he could gain power. I mean, he doesn't really have any like good motive anymore for what he's doing. He's just a character that kind of wants power for power's sake. And maybe he said like, oh, I was hurt, I was wrong in the past. Well, maybe he was, but now he's not like doing anything that's actually good. He even like abandoned the faunists. He even was going to destroy like all of Mistral and kill like all the faunists there. It's just like he's not fighting for the faunists anymore. He's fighting for himself. And they took this kind of character that could have been like in a gray area, kind of like Hazel, and they made him into an evil character with like really no good motives of why he's doing this stuff. And it just makes him less interesting and less, it really what it does, it makes him less relatable to the audience. You don't really get to see his side anymore. It has become very black and white. It seemed like as Blake became more white, more good, if you will, her learning forgiveness, they showed Adam to be more evil. And I liked what they did with Blake, kind of that transition between her gray area of not really forgiving the humans to the good area, or the white area or whatever, of her forgiving the humans. but they didn't have to take Adam's character out of the gray. They could have actually developed him further, and he might have been actually redeemable, but I don't see how he's redeemable at this point. And maybe not. Maybe they don't make him redeemable, but the audience actually relates to him because he actually has a good reason of why he's doing what he's doing. But now he doesn't. So I mean, they could change that. However, that's my number 9. Basically, more White Fang like in the final battle and Adam's character. Now my number 8 is really Ty not going after RWBY. I understand him not going after RWBY during Volume 4 because he had to look after Yang. But when Yang left, like, I almost expected him to leave with Yang. But he kind of acted like that parent of, oh, I'm going to let my kids go. Crow's looking after RWBY and Crow will look after them. But, like, is he going to be, like, relevant later on? Like, is he going to actually fight? Because according to, like, what Raven says, it sounds like he actually knows, like, all this stuff that's going on with Salem and stuff like that. So, and he must know, he must at least speculate that that's what's going on. That's why RWBY left for Mistral, and that's why Crow's looking after them, is because of all this stuff. And it's just like, it seems kind of weird that he wouldn't be there to kind of protect his daughters, if you will. I mean, there's a point where a parent has to let go, but this is like a huge step. I mean, Salem's pretty powerful, so I just didn't understand that direction they kind of took Ty's character in. I mean, it did make an easy exit for Raven, I guess, but other than that, it didn't really serve much of a point. Hopefully on later volumes, Ty actually does something. I mean, he does something in Volume 4. He helps Yang out, but I just want to see kind of more of his character instead, especially he was part of Team Stark and everything. So that's my number 8. Like, Ty just not going after RWBY, it just didn't make any sense to me from like a character standpoint, from a father standpoint of how we have presented Ty's character. My number 7 is Crow and Osman knowingly walking into a trap. So you see, Crow gets the call from Lionheart, and they look at each other and they kind of know, okay, this sounds like a trap. Basically, it's indirectly. It's not directly stated by either of them, but you kind of get the picture by their look and their tone of voice that they kind of both know that this is a trap. One, they don't tell they don't tell the kids. They don't tell Team RWBY or Team Jennifer, -1 respectively, and they kind of just willingly walk into a trap without any sort of plan of their own. They kind of know it's a trap. They speculate it's a trap, but they go into it anyway. I don't know. This doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't seem like a smart move. I mean, did Yang and Weiss actually make that much of a difference for them having a better hand, if you will? I mean, if Raven didn't betray them, basically, which of course she did, which of course she would have because of Cinder's actions, but if Cinder wasn't so greedy, like, they would have like straight up lost that fight. Like, the only reason they won is because basically Cinder and Raven fought each other. That's the only reason. And of course that Raven beat Cinder, and Raven actually let Yang take the relic because she's afraid of Salem. Now, what they did during the plot does make sense of how it was presented. The plot makes sense. I'm not saying that. What doesn't make sense is Crow and Osman knowingly walk into a trap. It doesn't seem like they are the characters that would do this. Of course, they didn't stop the Vital Festival when kind of things were kind of going wrong with Yang during like the 3rd volume, and they didn't believe Yang and everything, even though they knew the enemy was there and stuff like that. So maybe it does make sense. Maybe Crow and Osman are just very incompetent as leaders. Anyway, so that is my number 7. Crow and Osman knowingly walk into a trap. My number 6 is Weiss getting captured by Raven. Why? Why did Weiss have to get captured by Raven? This doesn't really make much sense. Like, she just happens to like crash land right where Raven is, and Raven captures her like a little bit before Yang is actually about to confront her mother, confront Raven, and try to get to RWBY. Okay, talk about plot convenience, and they could have just had Weiss find RWBY another way, but I guess they didn't have time, so they had to like merge those two stories together, and they wanted some support for Yang during her I actually confronted her mother. I don't know. This is very plot convenience. To the point that it's really kind of unbelievable if you think about it. How many like things had to go right for Weiss getting captured by Raven, or how many things had to go wrong for that to happen. Anyway, so that's my number 6, Weiss getting captured by Raven. My number 5 is side characters not having names. This is a minor one, and it seems like a minor one. However, if recurring characters like Weiss's pilot guy, and that one guy who Yang knocked out his tooth in, like, I think it was chapter 1 of the volume, shows up in multiple episodes, they should at least have names. Let's give them a unique names. They have unique personalities that they're basically just there to motivate the plot. But in previous volumes, you had characters that had kind of the same purpose of just motivating the plot, like moving along the plot, yet they all had names, including characters from pointless fights in the Vital Festival. You know, like the first fight was with Team RWBY, and I don't remember the team's name because that's how meaningful the fight was. But yet those characters had names, and these two characters don't. These two characters in particular should have names, and by the way, some of Raven's support, I should have actually put this in the list, I just forgot. There should have been more of her like bandits be stronger and be better at fighting. It doesn't make any sense why only her and Bernard would have been like good at fighting. Why didn't Raven, at this point, she had like over 10 years, right, trained more people up? And there should have been more characters that had names and more personality. But anyway, but those two characters in particular should have had names, and they don't. I hope they reveal them at some point. Anyway, so that's number 5. Side characters not having names. My number 4 is Selina Khan being killed so soon. Now, if there's one character who didn't have to have a name, and that's Selina Khan, because as soon as she was introduced, she died. However, because she was the leader of the White Fang and they kept mentioning her, she had a name. Anyway, that being said, she did have a unique personality, and I would have loved to see her character be in this grayscale that I keep talking about when I talk about Adam and Blake. However, they didn't do anything with her character, and they just decided to make Adam look like a freaking complete jerk and kill her. They had Adam in the grayscale, and they pushed him up to the evil scale, if you will. The medium scale. He joined the dark side, basically. And he just killed Selina Khan just so that he could seat at the throne of the White Fang. Yep, and then characters kept mentioning her because news didn't spread, and it benefited them, benefited the White Fang, and yep. So Selina Khan is the character they wasted the most, basically, so far in the series. She didn't even end with a good fight. Adam just one-shotted her. It's like she didn't even like know how to control an aura. Like, what is her semblance? Like she seemed kind of powerful, but she apparently couldn't even generate an aura, which doesn't make any logical sense since she's a leader of the White Fang. Anyway, so that's my number 4, Selina Khan being killed so soon. My number 3 is one that's been on my list in the past, that they still do it, and I don't know. I know why. I know why they do it. My number 3 is basically stills. And not just any stills, stills with people that you can easily tell the animation is not 3D. If you're going to do stills of backgrounds. Do stills background. They got the movement right, so it doesn't kind of look like stills. However, they use people, and the people looks completely different than the 3 animation they're using. So it's completely noticeable. Anyway, they only use stills during the Mistral thing, and as I said earlier, well, that's actually coming up. I didn't say it earlier. Mistral was very underdeveloped, and this made it actually more underdeveloped. So that's my number 3 is stills, and this might, if they do it next volume, I might put it at number 1. My number 2 is not seeing more of Mistral. They talk about Mistral having this black market. They talk about Mistral, how its upper levels are higher class and its lower levels are lower class, and they had shady people, and they sell stuff that you're not supposed to sell, black market stuff. However, that didn't interfere with the plot at all. It was just there because it was there. I would have loved to see like one more volume and them focusing in volume 5 more about Mistral and how things have gone bad in Mistral, as was mentioned by, I think, Ironwood, and his report from Winter, basically that things have gone bad in Mistral. However, we didn't get to see any of that. We just got to see Lionheart kind of stating things have gone bad, saying things about the console who we didn't see. We got Crow talking about kind of the black market a little bit, which we didn't see. So it's basically, they had ideas in Mistral. They had some concepts, but they just kind of wrote everything out, if you will, and focused on like Raven and Yang, which I enjoy. I enjoy that. I would like to see another volume and them focusing more on Mistral during this volume, if you will. Flush out some of the characters, give some characters some names, introduce some new characters. I don't know. So, and it's really a world building problem as well, because what's the point of Mistral now? We're probably never going to come back here, and this is the only chance to see it. So it's kind of like a pretty much waste of a kingdom. Anyway, so that's my number 2, not seeing more of Mistral. Now, my number 1 is Ilya liking Blake. Now, it is true I do standards of Christianity, and being gay, being homosexual, I find as a sin, if you will, according to the Bible. I follow the Bible. That being said, I have had friends in the past, and still do, who are homosexual, if you will. And that all being said, like, I did appreciate them not overdoing this. It was like kind of stated by Ilya indirectly, which is, if you're going to put it in there, do it indirectly. The story is not about really romance or anything dealing with it. It's about really a group of heroes and their journey to kind of save the world, to save Remnant. That's what the story is about, in like a sentence. So, I mean, romance is not a big part of the story. It's a very, very minor section. My big problem with this, well, one, you know, I as a Christian, I don't like it to be in any story, but the reason it's number 1 is because it undermines really Ilya's kind of change, if you will. She basically switched sides because of Blake, and when she realizes that Blake doesn't feel the same way about her or whatever, it kind of questions, oh, is Ilya gonna change back or whatever? I mean, it undermines her change. Like, there had to be some more of a reason why she changed other than this, and you kind of see it indirectly, but you kind of don't. And that's like my huge problem with this, is that Ilyas redemption was superficial, as it was that kind of at the surface. if you will. Maybe it was a little deeper, but from what I gained on the story, it wasn't any deeper. Like she didn't really question the philosophy. The philosophies of hurting people. She was like, I don't want to hurt people, but it's given us result. That she didn't really question those her philosophies and that kind of stuff, and that's just it really undermines her redemption in so many different ways. I mean, take a heterosexual couple, basically Mai and Zuko, how Mai changed sides for Zuko. That undermined Mai's redemption. She just did it for Zuko, and it was kind of like, but did she actually change? We see like later on in some of the comics that she actually has changed. However, at that moment she didn't, and it's kind of like it undermines her redemption, if you will. Anyway, so that's my number one. Ilya liking Blake, I did not like that at all for many different reasons, and but like I said, I do appreciate that it was done indirectly and it wasn't swapped in your face like other shows. For example, Flash just puts this kind of stuff in your face, and Flash is not supposed to be a show that's about like women's empowerment or whatever, or like all that other political crap. I mean, I don't mind stuff being shoved in indirectly and stuff like that, but like when stuff is shoved in your face, it's stupid. So I do appreciate them, Rooster Teeth, putting it indirectly, but I still don't want it in the story at all, and that's just my opinion. Anyway, so that's my number one. Anyway, so that's my bottom 10, and I did my top 10 at the beginning of the video. Next, I would just kind of like to talk about some the moral things of the book. One great thing is Blake, and she actually changed to show forgiveness, if you will. I thought that was done really well, and how she forgave Ilya, and that she kind of has this forgiveness attitude now towards humans in general. That was a really good character development, and as a Christian, from a Christian standpoint, I do forgiveness is always a huge thing in Christianity, and it's definitely where we should stand. In the Bible, it says, I don't know his exact verse, but it says something down the lines that how we forgive others will be the forgiveness shown to us, if you will. There's a lot more that goes into that verse than just that, and you got to take things in context when you read the Bible. However, forgiveness is always a big part of Christianity. I forgive those who've done you wrong and everything, and I do like them displaying it. Also, the other big thing was like Yang's character development, or how you don't need to take things head on, that instead of getting angry, you can calm down and figure out other ways around problems. From a Christian standpoint, it's definitely not good to get angry and stuff like that, and that's just good advice overall. Just kind of, there's other ways to deal with your problems other than facing them head on like Yang used to do. So those are like really two big things in it. I also liked Jean wanting to like protect his friends at all costs. That's really good. Overall, Volume 5 was a great volume, and I personally, it's personally my favorite volume, I think. I mean, it had its problems. I just listed 10 problems it had, some worse than others, and some people can disagree or agree with me whether there are problems or not. However, I think most people will agree with most of them on the list. But it has some amazing things too. My top 10 things, I mean, I could have done probably 20 things easily that I really enjoyed about this volume. Yang's character growth was amazing. I really enjoyed like Jean versus Cinder. It was just an amazing volume overall. Anyway, so that's my RWBY Volume 5 top 10 and bottom 10 things. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.